Good evening and welcome to the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus March membership meeting. This month, we're going to be talking about the potential Browns' new dome stadium and who might pay for it. I'm Steve Holeko. I'm the political director of the organization. And before we get to our main program, just want to go through a little housekeeping and a little bit about some upcoming CCPC events and projects. First of all, throughout the program, we're going to keep you guys muted. And then when the speakers are done, you can ask questions, either raise your hand or write the questions in the chat. And I do see some media here. We certainly welcome any questions that you guys might have. What we have found through numerous Zoom meetings is, and that's why we want to keep the chat open for questions, is that we don't put a lot of links and stuff in the chat. What we are going to do, since you registered by email, is we're going to send you an email tomorrow with all the things I'm going to mention at the beginning and some of the things that the speakers are going to mention throughout the program, so you can kind of look at it at your convenience. One of the links we're going to send in that email is how to become a member of the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus. If you like what you see tonight and you're not a member, click that link and you can become a member for free. Membership is free in our organization. There'll also be a donate link. We are all volunteer funded, all volunteer staffed, and we depend on small contributions from people like you to keep our organization going. You'll also get a link to the video of this event. We record all of our meetings on the CCPC YouTube channel, and this email is going out to folks who registered too and couldn't make it. But one of the things we found, if this meeting if you like this meeting and you share it, that would be great. But we often get up to 100 people that look at the video of the meeting, but don't actually come to the meeting. The great news on Monday, the abortion access constitutional amendment was cleared through the ballot board. And that is going to be a main focus of CCPC over the next few months. What we do know is petitions are being printed probably as we speak. As soon as they're available and signing events pop up, we'll let you know. But right now, we don't know anything. We don't know for sure if it's going to be a go this week or not. But basically, CCPC is partnering with the Cuyahoga County Democratic Party to gather these signatures. And so we'll be forwarding their events. We'll have some things of our own. One thing we're looking for is folks in different regions of the county who would be willing to deliver petitions to people willing to circulate. And in that email tomorrow, I'll send a little description about that. And if that's something that interests you, please let us know. Another constitutional amendment, our friends from the One Fair Wage campaign are kicking off this weekend to try to get the initial 1,000 signatures to the Attorney General, much as what we did with the abortion access amendment a few weeks ago. And I'll send you their events. They have East Side locations, West Side locations. And what might be fun is they're going to send petitioners down to the St. Patrick's Day parade on Friday. It's supposed to be warm weather, maybe a little wet, but you'll get information about that as well. We'll also send you our April meeting information. Our April meeting is going to be entitled Ohio Issues. We're going to have somebody give an update on the abortion access constitutional amendment. Zach Schiller from Policy Matters is going to talk about the budget, and Elaine Schleicher, who is from Honesty for Ohio Public Education, is going to talk about upcoming education issues. And very important announcement, and you'll get an email probably sometime next week about this, but we have new CCPC t-shirts, and our brilliant design people kind of tweaked the old design a little bit, make it look a little bit better. but it has our three buzzwords: educate, organize, mobilize on there. When you see the graphic, you'll like it, and hopefully you'll buy one. Oh, our designer, Susie Scullen, is on the call. Susie, raise your hand. So those will be available for purchase probably starting next week. And we're going to do it mail order. So you don't have to wait to look for us at an event. You can just click the link and we'll get it right to you. Tonight, we're at the education portion of our buzzwords. And with this issue, we may eventually move to organize and mobilize. But tonight, it's education. We're going to start off with a video that some of you may have seen. It was done by former U.S. Department of Labor Secretary and current brilliant journalist Robert Reich just before the Super Bowl. Robert Reich kind of set the stage perfectly for us. Now, continuing to set the stage is Ward 12 Cleveland City Councilwoman and CCPC member Rebecca Moore, who is going to talk about, well, kind of goes like this. The Browns are talking about building a new stadium, but it seems they still owe about $53 million in bonds to pay off the current stadium. So maybe they'll be tearing it down and still paying it off. Rebecca.
There you go. Thank you, Steve, for the handoff. I want to make sure to get through my part of it quickly so that I can hand it over to Dr. Humphreys, who I think is just so critical to have here as this conversation has been bubbling up in the news. My role that I want to play tonight is to share with you what we learned as Cleveland City Council members throughout the budget process this past cycle about Cleveland Browns Stadium, and to give you a little bit of the lingo and where to find in the public documents the current bonds and debts that are owed for Cleveland Browns Stadium. So I'm going to share my screen, and the first thing that I'm going to do is pull up page 362 of the 500-page mayor's estimate. Can you guys all see this? Can you guys all see this?
It's up.
Okay, great. So this is the page in the budget book for what Cleveland Stadium, i.e. this is the Cleveland Browns Stadium, what we shall not call First Energy Stadium. And this is where we see the money coming in and out of the stadium. So I'm pretty used to reading these pages now, and I realize just even now I'm seeing it with fresh eyes from somebody who hasn't been reading a budget book, and it looks really confusing. So the biggest thing you need to know is at the top of this page is about the expenditures, and the bottom of the page is about revenues. So you want to think about the money that's coming into the stadium and the money that's leaving. And the first thing to know is that pretty much every year, the revenues of the stadium, that doesn't mean we'll get to this, but it doesn't mean like the revenue that the Browns are generating, but the revenue in the special revenue fund called Cleveland Stadium is roughly equal to the expenses. And what are those expenses? The biggest one, the $9,225,000 expense in the 2023 budget, that is the allocated money to pay off the bonds that we still owe on our existing stadium. Plus, we have another $4 million below that of expenses for other capital repairs at the stadium. Plus, we have a roughly $1.4 million in insurance and stadium property taxes. And so all told, it costs the city $14.6 million to have the stadium on our books. So how do we pay that money? And you'll see that in the revenues. That's the bottom half of the page. And you'll see there's three important lines here. There's the $250,000. Guess what that is? That is the rent that the Browns pay to the city. So for the $14 million in expenses, the Browns are paying $250,000 in rent. The next line below that, that $4 million, that is roughly the percentage of the sin tax that is being allocated to the stadium. So a portion of the sin tax that the county collects flows into this special revenue fund specifically to help pay on the debts and the capital repairs. And then below that is $10.2 million. Where does that 10.2 that is transferring in Where is that coming from? That is coming straight from the city's general fund. So that is about 1.4% of the city's entire general fund budget. And that goes from our main pot of money that pays for everything that, we touch and feel day to day in the city. And it flows into this special revenue fund, and then it immediately flows out again to pay our debts. So that is point one I want to make, is how to read this budget page and how to understand it. So this is not saying that the Browns paid us $10 million. This is $10 million that we are pulling out of the general fund to cover the debts. The next thing that I want to pull up, point number 2, is about how can we see where those debts are? Because in the budget book each year, you cannot actually see how much we owe. And so we spent a little bit of digging, and the public document that you really want to look at for this, and hold on, I'm going to stop sharing and then share again. And I'm going to pull this up. This is the certified audit. This is a public document. I can send it to Steve so that you all can get the link. It's an even longer document. It's the city's annual audit. And this has a narrative on what's called the certificates of participation for the stadium going back to 1997. We originally took out $139 million in bonds. You can read through this whole long thing, lengthy. Basically, they have refinanced it a number of times, and the end result is that we have we started with 69 million of leftover money from that original pot of 139, and we've been slowly paying off on it every year. So that 9 million that you saw flow out of the stadium to pay off the debts, these are the debts that they are paying off, are the results of these certificates of participation. And if you want to go look at, let me close this and open the balance sheets. This is also in the certified audit. And again, these are a little bit hard to read, but let me share this screen. You can roughly see these certificates of participation for the 2010B stadium. We are currently paying less than 1% on that debt, but it will have to be refinanced soon. And this 2021 certified audit shows last year's application, or probably 2 years ago's payment of, in this case, about $8 million. So this is where you can see on the city's books, is in the certified audit, where those debts actually are and how close we are to paying them off. It looks like we're timed to pay off those original debts in 2028, which is also the year that the lease on the stadium expires. So the certified audit is point number 2 that I wanted to make. Point number 3 is I just really quickly want to highlight that there is actually a second pot of money that we are committed to, and that is $2 million every year through the, hold on one second. I should have put these all into one document so they were easy to scroll through, but you don't have enough time in life to do everything. Let me share this. We separately have a $2 million obligation each year on top of the debt obligation to go towards capital repairs. And every year we're spending more than that. So this year we spent $4 million, but no matter what, we have agreed to pay $2 million in capital repairs for the stadium. So that's point 3 that I wanted to make, is that there's also a separate $2 million pool that has to get pulled out every year under our contractual obligations with the Browns. The 4th point I wanted to make was a point that came up on the last day of the budget hearings around the admissions tax. So there was a really great exchange between some of my colleagues and our counterparts in the administration about essentially how does the city calculate its return on investment in the stadium. And the question was, can we see the admissions tax that the Browns pay so that we can get a better sense of the ROI? And the answer from the administration was no, that's confidential taxpayer information. So we do not have a way in that immediate public sense to determine the return on investment, even of the admissions tax of the stadium. Obviously, there's a lot more that goes into that calculus overall, but I think you'll hear from Dr. Humphreys about the limitations of those calculations. So I really wanted to emphasize that last point because it was such an interesting conversation topic during the budget hearings. You can go and look up the video. It was the February 24th, last day of the budget. And the last thing I'll leave you with is that one of my colleagues did ask, okay, you can't tell us the exact number, but can you tell us, do you know off the top of your head, does the city bring in enough revenue directly from the stadium and its associated taxes to cover its expenses? And we did get a clear answer on that from the administration, and that answer was no. So with that, those are the 4 big points that I wanted to make, that you can find the Cleveland Brown Stadium in the budget book, but to find the underlying bonds, you have to go to the certified audit. And the certified audit also includes our $2 million capital obligation. And we do not currently know how much is coming in admission fees. And with that, I'll hand it back to Steve so that we can hear from Dr. Humphreys.
Just a quick note about Cleveland tax dollars going into sports deals. Now, all these sports deals come with a combination of City of Cleveland tax revenue and county council tax revenue. So if you live in the City of Cleveland, you're paying double taxes because your county taxes and your City of Cleveland taxes are going into the sports deals. Whereas if you live in the suburbs, only your county taxes are going into the sports deals. Now, a statistic we found out when we were working on the Q renovations and referendum project in 2017. Now, this is for Quicken Loans Arena, then now Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse, but it's probably similar for the Browns Stadium. For Cavs games, any given Cavs games, 70% of the people attending don't even live in Cuyahoga County, and 90% don't even live in the City of Cleveland. And that number is even higher for concerts and things like Disney on Ice. And that is 74% don't live in the county and 95% don't live in Cleveland. The other thing we found out during the Q referendum, and it's always good to do something like this before you launch a referendum, is do a poll. And we found out that 72% of the residents of the City of Cleveland opposed that expenditure. And if the Browns try to do something now, I'm sure that number will be similar. Next up, I want to introduce the preeminent expert on stadium sports financing in the country, Professor Dr. Brad Humphreys from the University of West Virginia.
Thanks, Steve. Rebecca, that's a great job at walking through the brutal budgetary mathematics of stadium subsidies. I see a lot of these deals, and I'm exposed to a lot of the details of these deals. It's part of my research, and that's as egregious as any sweetheart deal I think that I've ever seen in terms of the amount of money that's going from general revenue funds to subsidize a stadium. Because that means, and let me just remind everybody, because this is general revenue funds, every taxpayer in Cleveland is contributing to that, whether they ever watch a Browns game, listen to a Browns game, care about the Browns or not. Every taxpayer is providing these subsidies to a team who, Dr. Reich has already pointed out, is owned by a billionaire. The equity implications for that are shocking, I would say. But don't feel so bad, because lots of other deals like this around the country look exactly like this. It is certainly not out of the ordinary for taxpayers in a city to be subsidizing what is at its root a private activity by a for-profit, closely held private firm. It just happens. right? And Dr. Reich pointed out this as well. Why does it happen? Because team owners can threaten to move their franchise, and that threat is taken as credible. And that's the root of this problem, and that's the root of why taxpayers have to foot these sort of bills. I think the other important thing to recognize in this particular case is that this football stadium is not that old. It's less than 25 years old. How long was a municipal stadium in use? Long time, right? Raldo can almost certainly tell us this. I don't know it off the top of my head. And this is an increasing trend around the country. Owners increasingly say, well, my pretty new stadium is already obsolete and has to be replaced because they can, really. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that football stadium. Yeah, sure, I guess a dome stadium would provide a superior fan experience to that. But, paying out of general tax revenues in Cleveland to make sure that NFL fans at the stadium get a more cushy experience than they have now is really difficult to defend on equity grounds because of where those tax revenues are coming from. So I think, I want to leave time for everybody else and for a lot of questions here. So I'll just conclude by saying, really, the reason that this is happening is largely outside of the control of individuals, taxpayers in Cleveland and people like you. And it's because we have in the United States a public policy which allows NFL team owners to threaten to leave and credibly threaten to do that. And if there was no credible threat to leave, then the Haslams would not be able to extract this kind of subsidy out of taxpayers. But they know that the Browns are a deeply ingrained part of the civic fabric in Cleveland, and that they can gain tremendous leverage out of threats to leave. And they're just playing by the rules that we set up as a matter of public policy for them.
Thank you, Dr. Humphreys. One of the things that we found out, and this has been covered in the media, is that when the Haslams bought the Browns from the Lerners, part of the sale agreement was a promise not to move the team. And what we're trying to find out is that legally binding? Now, of course, Haslam could just sell the team to somebody else who moves it, but he did sign that agreement. So that threat, I don't know, it might not be in play this time, which would make it a whole different ballgame, I think. But we'll see. All right, our last speaker is nothing less than a Cleveland legend. Legendary journalist Raldo Bartomoli, who has written for the Wall Street Journal, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and many of you old-time activists know of his great column, A Point of View, that ran for 32 years. But Raldo has also covered all of these sports deals going back. Well, you tell us how far back, Raldo.
Well, back to the 80s when Vince Campanella tried to do a dome stadium and didn't do it because he had the wrong tax. But we have to remember that the sin tax was passed in 1990 for 15 years. Then they extended it 10 years in 1995. And then they extended it 20 years to now 2034. So soon your grandchildren, especially if they do the Brown Stadium, your grandchildren will be paying this tax. The cost is always a problem. But in Cleveland, when they first proposed this tax, they said that there would be no tax abatement. Then Mike White, the mayor at that time, and Tim Hagan, the county executive at that time, went to Columbus and they got a tax exemption so that none of the stadiums, none of the facilities pay taxes. And now it's been more than 25 years for some of those. And I figured out how much lost revenue that is counted. And it's $500 million, $500 million that has not been paid in taxes that they once promised. And that all mostly comes from the Cleveland schools. At least 60% comes from the Cleveland schools. So that's who's paying the most. They said at the time when they pushed the tax that they would pay $15 million a year to the schools. They paid nothing. They said they were going to have 28,000 good paying jobs for the jobless. That was a total lie. The city also, people don't understand this. They don't add this on. They constructed 2 garages at Gateway at $42 million, plus what the bonding cost is. RTA made up a walk from the Tower City to the stadium at $13 million. We don't know how much the bonding was for that. But further, another thing that people don't understand is that Mike White promised in writing that whenever the baseball team had 35,000 people, that he would provide 50 Cleveland cops that night and 41 for any large crowd at the arena. Now, we know that the city now does not have as many policemen as they are supposed to. And now I'd like to see if some of the reporters will go and find out how many policemen are being sidetracked to the stadium or the arena while the neighborhoods are going without. I was very happy to hear Councilman's talk. Originally, when the Brown Stadium was passed by council, they passed a parking tax of 8%, which was supposed to bring in $213 million. An admissions tax, which was increased, was supposed to go to the city, but went to the Browns, 36 million. Car rental taxes, 18 million. And of course, extended seats tax, 116 million. That's where the money is supposed to come to pay for the Browns stadium. And we forget how well we've treated these people. When Gateway was built, they built a $5 million restaurant in the Jacobs Field, which is now the First Energy Field. And they equipped it with all kinds of equipment that every restaurant needs. Now they're saying that when they redo it, they don't want that restaurant there. It was the largest restaurant in downtown Cleveland when this Jacobs was built. And it was a cost of, I think it was $5 million. I've got my article here. Yeah, $5 million. And then the offices for Gateway in the stadium were supposed to be within the stadium. Instead, they built a 5-story office building at a cost of, I think it was $7 million. Now the Guardians are asking to rebuild and redo that office. And if they totally equipped the office with hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment, including a table which was shaped as a boat and had inlaid Chief Wahoo. I don't know if they've taken that out yet, but there have been so many added attractions that have cost huge amounts of money. And the payment of it is sin taxes, which are regressive taxes, which are paid, of course, by the lower income people, the heaviest costs. I think I should end there and let people ask questions and talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Roldo. Just a couple more quick points, before we get to the questions. So far, all of this is being floated. It's being reported in the media that Mayor Bibb and the Haslams are having talks. But so if you saw Brent Larkin's column last Sunday, now Brent is no leftist progressive. He's pretty much middle of the road. He said the Browns are coming for your wallets. And some other notable things too. The preeminent blog for Cleveland sports that usually talks only about sports, okay, said Browns don't need a new stadium, much less a domed stadium. And that's unusual for them to get involved in that conversation. It's usually about the players and who trades they should make and so forth. On the other hand, 92.3 The Fan, which is the preeminent sports talk show. Some of you may listen to it. I listen to it when I'm working out to tune out from politics, but suddenly they started talking about how wonderful a dome stadium would be. So I kind of like, oh, this kind of sucks. But they're floating it. 92.3 The Fan also just happens to be the flagship radio station for the Browns broadcasts. So, that's not a coincidence. So this is where we're at, and we'll take questions. Deb, you've been looking at the chat, and if you didn't write a question in the chat, raise your hand and we'll try to get to you.
We did have one, and I will put the link to that article that Steve just referenced in the chat.
It'll be in the email tomorrow too.
Okay, yeah, let's just put it. How about we just put it in the email tomorrow, Steve? Does that work?
Yeah. And Robert Wright's video as well will be in there.
Says, what is the cost of a new stadium, and how much of the Haslams committed to spending? Anybody know?
If it's a dome stadium, it'll be well over $1 billion. And if it's like a palace, like the one they have in LA, it'll be $2 billion.
Yeah, they're not building anything for under $1 billion now anywhere. Right. And SoFi Stadium in LA was about $2 billion. Now that's open air, but it's still a palace. I would guess at minimum $1.5 billion.
Okay, we have a couple hands up. Okay, Ed, go ahead. You have to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much for having this. This question's for Professor Humphreys. So one of the things that we hear a lot about in Cleveland, and I'm sure it's typical all over the country in cities that have sports arenas, is the term economic impact. It seems like every time there's any sort of stadium cost or refurbishment that happens, and there's any sort of opposition to that, that the forces at play line up and start to tout the economic impact. Oh, look at all the people that go and have a beer before the game, or go out to dinner, or stay in a hotel. I guess my question is two parts. One is, how do you even calculate that? And two, I guess the accuracy of that calculation. But then secondly, does it actually play out? Does the revenue going to pay for a stadium and for a team in a city balance out against the economic impact that's being brought in? Thanks.
Thanks, Ed. That's a great question. So here's what professional sports teams and facilities do. They are really good at concentrating economic activity in and around the stadium on game day. And that's really visible, and everybody can see that. And the problem is that gets confused with new economic impact, which wouldn't have taken place in the city absent the team and the game. But that money, somebody going out and getting a beer before the game, that beer would have been purchased somewhere else in Cleveland at some other time. That's just spending moved around. That's not actual tangible economic benefit to the community. Going out to dinner is the same story. You're just concentrating economic activity. And there is 20 years of research that's been published in peer-reviewed economics journals that shows that there is no tangible new economic benefits associated with professional sports in any city at any time. It's just this what economists call displacement spending. It's just moving those dollars around somewhere. Hotels, the evidence is pretty conclusive there. That, I mean, Cleveland's a tourist destination. People are still coming to Cleveland to go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, to go to all cultural activities, all the great restaurants, all those sorts of things. So yeah, people were traveling into Cleveland and renting hotel rooms, but they're probably renting hotel rooms that would have been rented to other people if the sporting events were not taking place. And I think the strongest evidence that this is what's really going on comes from when we've had strikes and lockouts in professional sports. Because the NHL lost the whole season, 2004, 2005. There's been work stoppages in the NBA, in the NFL. No city's economy ever suffered during any of those work stoppages in professional sports. Why? Because again, people just went out and spent those entertainment dollars somewhere else in the community. So it's a myth to claim that there's going to be tangible economic benefits generated by a new NFL stadium and that stadium will somehow magically pay for itself. There's just no evidence supporting that idea.
Next question comes from Eric Deemer.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, my connection's a little slow. But, well, I know that this was a function earlier and not organized, but to me, I mean, I think pretty much everyone knows that these deals are terrible and that they're boondoggles. Anyway, I don't need too much education there. I'm more interested really on what is going to happen with us as an activist organization, and what sort of tactics, what sort of coalitions, what sort of strategy would be to actually resist something like this. I mean, in 2017, we came incredibly close to actually derailing one of these deals, which I think is the first time that's happened in history. And I think that's great, but like, I'd hope we'd learn from some of that, or there'd been some kind of autopsy or what. I mean, does anyone, does Steve or anyone have a sense of what's going on with other groups or unions, or like, what measures could be taken to oppose this or anything like that?
Well, I will say this, 2017, the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus provides boots on the ground. We are all volunteer funded, all volunteer staffed. That referendum effort, SEIU 1199, Greater Cleveland congregations, they put the money into it. So realistically, we cannot launch a referendum unless we get some folks with money that are willing to help out. That did not emerge when the Guardians asked for money a couple of years ago. So to answer your question, Eric, we'll see. We'll fight it with testimony, meetings like this. We'll fight it as much as we can without having the means for a referendum, and we'll see what happens.
Okay, Mark. Go ahead. Go ahead, Roldo. Sorry.
When the original sin tax was opposed strongly by the 21st District Caucus, And particularly, I think Carl Stokes was behind that. I think that's what you need. You need some political muscle that's going to be opposed to it. And the city voted it down, but the suburbs voted it up. And that's why we had the tax. Otherwise, it would have gone down. We need a political organization. And both Bibb and Ronayne should be deadly against this. And they should be forced to get on the record that they are against this. They're not going to spend this kind of money for a team that's owned by billionaires. Otherwise, they're worthless.
So I'm just going to ask, Raldo, there's a question in the chat for you specifically. When you said that the teams don't pay taxes, which taxes specifically?
Property taxes. All the stadiums were exempted from the property tax. There are structures. They're supposed to pay property taxes. And I looked up years of the property values, and they never paid any taxes. Of course, they don't have to, because White and Hagan went down to Columbus and got it passed. Now, not only in Cleveland, but in any city in Ohio, in Cincinnati, in Columbus, they don't have any stadium, any sports facility does not have to pay property taxes. And those are the taxes that primarily go to city schools.
Our next question, Marge and Jim.
Mute myself. Oh, I can unmute myself. So I actually sat in on city council hearings back in '95 for the first time that when they passed this. And one of the things I want to say, it's encouraging that the vote in city council was 13-8 when there were 21 members. And that was with really pathetic organizing. I mean, there were just very, very few people around the city who were saying, no to this. And they put enough pressure on city council that it was also a pathetic vote. There were some of the worst, some of those specific statements that council members made were sad, but let me say it that way. But my recollection of the lease is that the city signed with the NFL because there was no team at that point. Modell had already moved the team to Baltimore, was that it was a 30-year lease promising that the city, if they built the stadium, the NFL was promising they would have a team in Cleveland for 30 years, as long as Cleveland kept the stadium up to NFL standards for 30 years. So I think that's where that requirement for capital improvements comes from. So I don't think we actually have a promise for a team for any more than our 30-year current lease deal necessarily. But I guess one of my question really is partly for Rebecca Moore, which thank you so much for being on this call. Your comments and information have been really helpful. Partly for you about whether you see that there being any political will, because this is not just, in my mind, the mayor and Chris Ronayne, this is city council signing off on expenses. And for Dr. Humphreys, what happens with other cities? How do you say a little bit about, is there the political will to say no? And what happens to cities? Do they survive when they lose their team? Will we survive if we lost the Browns? I'm not a native Clevelander, so I actually could survive pretty well, but that's heresy, I realize, to a lot of Clevelanders.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Marge. I'm definitely only here speaking for myself. So absolutely council as a whole, the administration, like no one has, this is so early, there are no positions that have been staked out. But I will say, when you look over the discussions of the stadium from the last budget, and every time it comes up in committee, I think you see some pretty frustrated voices. So I do think that there are definitely council members to work with here.
Steve, go ahead. You were next.
Well, the only thing I could say on the political will, and Raldo mentioned, yeah, Mayor Bibb and County Executive Ronay need to get out and oppose this. We don't know that they won't. And Brent Larkin actually described them as being somewhat progressive. And that's how I would characterize them as well. I mean, CCPC endorsed both of them, and never in our history have we endorsed a mayor of Cleveland or a county executive.
Have they said a word about this?
No, but Raldo, I don't think I don't think now is the time they need to see what happens. And so I guarantee they don't want to be put in this uncomfortable position.
It's gonna be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Marge, there's no evidence that a city has ever been economically damaged by the departure of a professional sports team. And believe me, there's plenty of those cases to look at, and economists have studied those things. LA didn't have an NFL team for 20 years, didn't seem to bother them, right? But I was living in Baltimore, sadly, and it's why I got into this line of research, when Baltimore stole the Browns from Cleveland, and there was no economic damage to Baltimore of the departure of the Colts in '84 until the Browns came in. In fact, there's some evidence that teams leaving cities actually improve things. For example, I've written a paper that showed that when the Seattle Supersonics left Seattle and the Charlotte Hornets left Charlotte, property values near those facilities went up after they left because the traffic and crowds and crime and trash went away when those teams left. So no, now, is it going to damage the community fabric of a city? Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. There is no substitute. Robert Reich said that there is no substitute for a professional sports team in terms of drawing people in a community together. But in economic terms, nah, it doesn't do anything.
Yeah, and Brad, if I could just share one story from my campaign that I always think of when faced with this question. I was knocking a door, and it was a senior citizen, an older woman, and it was just clear that she hadn't talked to anybody in a while. And so she had a whole laundry list of things she really wanted to go through. She was like, this pothole is messed up. Will you fix this pothole if you get on city council? And she's like, the buses come by for the school and the buses are too loud. And she's like, can you get the buses to slow? So there was this whole laundry list of things. And I was at her door for probably 20 minutes. And she was just kind of running out of steam. And then she paused and she inhaled and she was like, and those Cavaliers, they need to win more. Can you get them to win more? And it was just, it's part of our fabric. Our teams are part of who we are as a city. And it is, I think that the NFL has made things very complicated because of both their track record in terms of how they treat their players, the physical toll on the game, the racial elements that we've seen, and certainly our quarterback. Let's acknowledge that. This is not a team that that's made it easy to root for, but it's Cleveland and these are the Browns. So it's going to be tough.
So we have a question from Sean. Go ahead, Sean.
Thanks, Deb. My question primarily is for Dr. Humphreys and others who have studied this. Have there been any examples, either national or international, if in Europe for soccer, in India for cricket, and all these other places, where a city, county, and state were able to come to a fair agreement with the billionaire owner to say something of covering the base costs and then allowing the billionaire majority of the profits, half the profits, anything that's been a good deal?
Sean, that's a great question. First, these sports facility subsidies do not occur in Europe. In Europe, the Premier League, all those top football leagues in Europe, those teams pay for their own stadiums and pay for the upkeep and all of that. And the reason is twofold. First, many of those teams are community owned. That's actually against the rules of North American sports leagues. You can't have a community owned team. It must be owned by individuals. And the second is the promotion relegation system sort of polices this because it allows entry into those markets and competition. Now, have there been good deals? Absolutely. SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles, they got some infrastructure spending, but Stan Kroenke paid for that pretty much entirely himself. The San Francisco Giants, the stadium they play in now, that was paid for entirely by the team. The Washington Redskins, sorry, I have trouble with team names. Commanders, they built their own stadium and own it. So there are plenty of examples, not a huge number, but there's plenty of examples where teams are easily able to build and maintain their own stadiums.
So we have another question.
Sean's got it. I think Sean has a follow-up. Maybe he just had his hand up.
I've lost you, Sean, in the mix. Did you have another question?
Thank you. I just wanted a clarification. Where is that ruling that we can't have community-owned teams in North America? Is that
It's
federal?
it's in the bylaws of the leagues. The leagues are the ones that they make their own rules, right? So no, it's not any sort of government policy. It's each individual league in North America has in their bylaws that no public entity can own a team.
Thank you.
Okay, Andre Daly.
Hello, I just had a comment when this topic with the sports team and potentially publicly financing a new stadium. The average person here makes roughly around 21K a year, and that's pretty poor. And to come into the city and to ask poor people to shoulder the burden for that, I feel is especially heinous. I've talked with many constituents and residents in the neighborhoods and throughout the city. And there's a lot of complaints right now, but not one person has said to me, wow, wouldn't it be great if we had a new stadium? Wow, we really like to have a new stadium. So I think when we look at poor people and we tell them that they're going to shoulder the burden for projects that honestly don't really benefit them, all that much. I saw some numbers recently, and not that many Clevelanders right now are actually going to the games. It's the surrounding areas that are pretty much keeping things afloat from my understanding. So I really just want that to be taken very seriously when we talk about public money for a project that's private. Who is it going to benefit, and what's the cost benefit analysis? And for this particular topic, it seems like there's very little benefit for the people in Cleveland as far as putting their public dollars behind building a new stadium. And what's wrong with this stadium, right? They can't fix that. So that's it.
They fill it up every game. Hello?
Do we have any more questions?
We have one from Justin. I'd like to hear why Raldo is making the case that now is the time.
Well, because you have to start fighting it right now, and you have to build up the opposition to it. Otherwise, all these council people will fall in line as long as the mayor and the county guy falls in line too. Everybody will fall in line. You need to have a public outcry and strong resentment to having this pushed down people's face. It's got to be now. You can't wait.
Go ahead, Marge.
Jim this time.
Jim, sorry.
There has been at least some talk of at least trying to regionalize the cost so that it's a multi-county assessment as opposed to just a city of Cleveland assessment or a Cuyahoga County assessment. Is there any, and I guess this is for our professor, are there any examples of that being done elsewhere where a multi-county coalition actually paid the bill as opposed to a beleaguered city like Cleveland?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There are a wide variety of financing examples that are out there, and the ones that I'm familiar with in Maryland, because I used to live in Baltimore. The state, the county, the city of Baltimore, they were all involved. It wasn't just one beleaguered urban city doing this. So yeah, the funding models could be worked out. And it's pretty common that state governments even would step in and subsidize these sort of things. But I think the bigger issue is it's important to try to fight these subsidies to begin with, because on economic grounds, they're incredibly hard to justify. These team owners nobody's ever sold a professional sports franchise at a loss. Well, I'm in Cleveland. I'm talking in Cleveland here. I need to quantify that. The Seals actually went bankrupt, and when there was an NHL team in Cleveland, but nobody's ever sold a team at a loss, and they're always getting huge profits on the back end. And they should be paying for this out of their own pockets and not forcing taxpayers to subsidize it.
Just a quick note, and Dr. Humphreys may not know this, but just today, Scene Magazine did a story about, well, maybe the counties surrounding Cuyahoga can help pay for the potential new Brown Stadium. And the response from, there's 7 surrounding counties, was either no comment or what's in it for us. So I just don't know there's any way to get the surrounding counties to pay. Maybe I'm wrong, but
that's a physical coordination problem that would have to somehow be solved at the state level. And you're probably never going to get the political will to do that.
We don't have any other questions, Steve.
all right. On the any other questions, going once?
Oh, wait, Will, go ahead.
Thanks, Professor and Geraldo. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
My question is a follow-up to Jim's question. Is there precedent for like stadium maintenance fees that are added on tickets, whereby those who attend the stadiums, the money is recycled into the maintenance of the facility?
Wow, that's a really interesting question. That's a classic example in economics of a user fee, right? It's the people that are attending the stadium that are generating the wear and tear in the stadium and that requires maintenance, right? I'm not aware of any sort of financing mechanism like that, but on economic grounds, it would be very easy to justify that those people who are getting the most benefit out of the stadium, the ones that are attending games, should bear part of the cost. Now, ticket taxes are common, and many facilities have ticket taxes attached to them, but it's unclear where those, like we know here, it's unclear where those revenues actually go. And it might be quite popular to tie some of that directly to facility maintenance. Yeah, that's a good idea, Will. That's a good question.
The arena was they had overruns. And January 15th was the final payment on those overruns. I kept trying to get some reporters to do stories, but they wouldn't. But anyway, the city admissions tax went year after year to help pay the bonds on the overrun. And all of the admissions tax from the arena were being shuffled off to pay the bonds for the arena, in addition to general fund money from the county, $8-9 million a year. So they just find so many ways to siphon off the cash, and they do it.
We have another question from Ed.
Yeah, this question's for Dr. Humphreys again. So you mentioned just a couple minutes ago about some of the quote unquote better deals that cities have gotten, where the owners of the teams or the conglomerate that owns a team has funded all or part of either stadium rehabilitation or construction of a new stadium. I wonder if you could kind of briefly talk about the community involvement around those, since it sounds like, you know, especially in Cleveland, we're going to have a fight on our hands when this finally kind of comes from behind closed doors into the public. So I wonder if you could speak to what you've seen as far as what have been successful efforts in terms of changing the funding mechanism. And was that a grassroots effort? Was that city government pushing? Was it a mixture? You know, what happened in those situations?
And city governments are never against these deals.
Okay.
And I mean, in general, because it generates a lot of political capital for local politicians. You do not want to be, for example, the mayor of Baltimore who let the Colts move to Indianapolis, because they'll never let you forget that. So it's mostly grassroots organizations who successfully fight these things. And of course, that makes it even more difficult because they are the most poorly funded entity in any of these debates, right? The teams have huge incentives to spend a lot of money to get their point across, because they're going to be making a lot of money off of the subsidies in the new facilities. Local media are typically not uniformly for them, because local media doesn't want to lose a team, because that's a big part of their business model, is to cover local sports, and it drives eyeballs and subscribers and all sorts of things like that. So they're typically not aligned against this, and the deck is then really stacked against what is almost always local grassroots organizations. And I think that's another reason why we see these subsidy deals succeed again and again and again, because the people who are naturally opposed to them just are not as well funded as the people who would be the beneficiaries of these subsidies.
No more questions, Steve.
Yes, Dr. Humphreys makes a good point. CCPC is not nearly as well funded as the Browns, but we'll do our best and see what happens. But before we go, first of all, let's give our speakers a round of applause. Either reactions or do this. All right. Thank you guys very much, Dr. Humphreys.
Thank you.
Taking time out from his spring break to join us from West Virginia. Raldo taking time out from his retirement to come out of retirement, and City Councilwoman Rebecca Maurer for sharing, you know, what she has found out. Just a quick note about one of the little things Rebecca said, how sports are in the very fabric of our community. That's true. You can be opposed to stadium sports financing and projects as CCPC generally is, but you can also be a sports fan. So I'm going to leave now and go see how the Cavs do against the 76ers tonight. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
All right. I think